Good morning and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm Clovis and this is Friday, May 22nd, 2026. Let me start with your weather here in northern Illinois. Right now it's about 66 degrees, though it feels a bit cooler at 60 with overcast skies and winds around 14 miles per hour. Today's high will reach 66 with a low of 46 and we're staying overcast. Looking ahead to your Memorial Day weekend, tomorrow Saturday climbs to 75, Sunday hits 74, and Monday for Memorial Day itself we're looking at a high of 81 degrees. Tuesday continues the warming trend at 84, so good news for those holiday plans, though keep in mind we're expecting overcast conditions throughout the extended forecast. Today on the show, we've got a packed episode for you. We're tracking major developments from Washington, where Tulsi Gabbard has resigned as Director of National Intelligence. There's significant international news from Ukraine, Iran talks, and a concerning Ebola outbreak in the Congo. Locally, we'll cover some important Chicago stories, including new shelter developments and community events. In tech news, we're diving into Project Glasswing from Anthropic, Deno's latest release, and some fascinating discussions about AI model pricing. And in our security briefing, we've got critical vulnerabilities to discuss, including a new Drupal SQL injection flaw already being exploited in the wild, plus updates from CISA's own security incident. It's going to be an information-dense show, so let's get right into it. We're starting with world and U.S. news, and the top story this Friday is coming from Washington. Reuters and NBC News are reporting that Tulsi Gabbard has resigned as Director of National Intelligence, citing her husband's cancer diagnosis. According to PBS NewsHour, Gabbard's full resignation letter has been released, and President Trump announced that Gabbard's deputy, Lukas, will serve as acting director. However, Reuters is also reporting from a source that the White House actually forced Gabbard to resign, which adds an interesting dimension to this story beyond the personal health reasons cited publicly. This is significant because Gabbard's tenure was already controversial from the start, with questions about her past positions on foreign policy and intelligence matters. NPR Politics noted that her departure comes at a particularly sensitive time with ongoing Iran negotiations and continued intelligence operations related to Russia and Ukraine. Speaking of Iran, AP News reports that Secretary of State Rubio is claiming slight progress in Iran talks, with Pakistan now renewing efforts to mediate a peace deal. The negotiations appear to be moving forward despite the complicated geopolitical situation. Bloomberg Markets is noting that these peace hopes are actually boosting risk sentiment in financial markets, with the dollar stalling as investors become more optimistic. From Ukraine, BBC World News reports that President Zelensky says he expects U.S. proposals on new formats for peace talks. Meanwhile, Reddit's r/World News live thread on day 1548 of the Russian invasion reports that Putin wants the war concluded this year on what he calls victorious terms, including control of the Donbass region, according to Bloomberg. There's also significant international news from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The BBC reports that the Ebola risk has been raised to very high by the WHO, with Reddit's r/World News highlighting that the WHO chief says the outbreak is spreading rapidly. AP News adds that Congo is now curtailing funeral wakes as part of containment efforts, as the WHO upgrades its risk assessment. This is particularly concerning given how quickly Ebola can spread in outbreak conditions. From the NATO alliance, PBS NewsHour reports that NATO allies are bewildered by Trump's about-face on U.S. troop moves in Europe. Secretary of State Rubio was reportedly trying to reassure allies, according to both PBS and the BBC, but there's clear confusion about American military commitments to the alliance. In Latin American affairs, AP News is covering Trump's Cuba strategy, noting that it echoes his Venezuela playbook but with key differences. Politico reports that Rubio has declared Cuba a national security threat to the U.S., marking a significant escalation in rhetoric toward Havana. The AP analysis suggests this pressure campaign may unfold differently than the Venezuela approach did. From Canada, there's significant political news as Reddit r/World News reports that Canadian Prime Minister Carney says Alberta is essential to Canada after a separation vote announcement. This speaks to ongoing tensions between the federal government and the western provinces. On Capitol Hill, Reddit's r/Politics is reporting that Congressman Cohen has introduced 6 articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts. This is a major development in the ongoing tensions between Congress and the judiciary. Additionally, the House passed what's being called a Don't Say Trans bill that would force teachers to out trans students nationwide, according to Reddit. The vote breakdown showed 198 Democrats voting against it, but 8 Democrats joined Republicans in passing it. NPR reports that GOP senators have delayed immigration funding, with significant infighting within the Republican caucus. AP News notes that Congress is seeing senators from both parties pushing Defense Secretary Hegseth for action on Ukraine aid, suggesting some bipartisan cooperation on that front despite other divisions. And Reddit's r/politics is also highlighting that the House GOP canceled an Iran war powers vote for the second straight day because, according to the headline, they were afraid it would pass. This speaks to real divisions within the Republican caucus about executive authority on military matters. On the economic front, AP News reports that Kevin Warsh has been sworn in as the new Federal Reserve Chair after Trump's bid for greater control over the independent bank. This transition is significant for monetary policy going forward. The AP is also covering a story about Wall Street continuing to rise even as U.S. households keep getting more discouraged about economic conditions, highlighting a disconnect between market performance and consumer sentiment. Moving to local news for Chicago and Illinois, WGN Chicago is reporting on the funeral held today for fallen Chicago Fire Department firefighter Stephen Decker. This is a solemn reminder of the risks our first responders face every day, and the entire community is mourning this loss. Reddit's r/Chicago is highlighting a positive development on Lincoln Avenue. According to the Post, the once notorious Diplomat Motel has been transformed into a stylish new shelter for the unhoused called Haven on Lincoln. What makes this particularly noteworthy is that it's Chicago's first shelter, giving each resident their own private, bathroom-equipped room. The Post notes this is a well-designed facility, and according to the city's housing department, more facilities like this are coming. This represents a significant shift in how Chicago is approaching homelessness services, moving away from the traditional congregate shelter model. On a lighter note, Reddit r/Chicago is reporting that Illinois is looking to make the Italian beef the state's official sandwich. I mean, if any sandwich deserves that honor in Illinois, it's probably the Italian beef. The Post is getting significant engagement with 278 upvotes, showing this resonates with locals who take their food culture seriously. WGN is also reporting on a developing story where an officer was shot in a Michigan City emergency room. Michigan City is just across the border in Indiana, but this affects the broader region. It's a concerning incident highlighting the dangers faced by law enforcement, even in hospital settings. There's also tragic news from Des Plaines, where WGN reports a woman was found dead following an overnight fire. Investigations are ongoing. And in disturbing criminal news, WGN Chicago reports that an Illinois State Police chemist and former volleyball coach has been charged with sex abuse. These cases involving positions of trust are always particularly troubling for the communities involved. Now let's dive into tech news, and there's quite a lot happening today. Starting with AI developments, Hacker News is featuring Project Glasswing, an initial update from Anthropic. The post has 74 points and 33 comments. Anthropic, the company behind Claude, is known for their research into AI safety and interpretability, so any project update from them tends to be significant. Project Glasswing appears to be related to their ongoing research efforts, though I'll link to the full details in the show notes. Speaking of Anthropic and Claude, there's a fascinating Microsoft story gaining traction. Hacker News is reporting, with 113 points and 77 comments, that Microsoft has started canceling Claude Code licenses internally. According to The Verge, this is part of a broader shift to token-based AI billing that's apparently blowing up annual budgets in just months. This is a really important story because it shows how enterprises are struggling to budget for AI services when usage can scale unpredictably. The old model of per-seat licensing is colliding with the reality of token-based consumption pricing. On the pricing front, Hacker News reports with 182 points that DeepSeek has made their V4 Pro price discount permanent. This is significant in the AI pricing wars we're seeing play out. When major players start making aggressive pricing moves permanent rather than promotional, it suggests the competitive landscape is intensifying. From the development tools world, Hacker News is featuring Deno version 2.8, garnering 229 points and 110 comments. Deno continues to position itself as a more secure and modern alternative to Node.js, and each release tends to bring refinements to that vision. In a somewhat controversial move, Hacker News reports with 215 points and 176 comments that Bun support is now limited and deprecated in itDLP. For those unfamiliar, Bun is another JavaScript runtime that's been positioning itself as faster than Node and Deno. The fact that itDLP, a popular video download tool, is pulling back support suggests there may be stability or compatibility concerns. The comment count shows this is generating significant discussion in the developer community. There's interesting news in the 3D modeling and architecture space. Hacker News reports with 309 points and 118 comments that Antigravity 2.0 tops the OpenSCAD architectural 3D LLM benchmark. This is from Model Rift, and it speaks to how AI is increasingly being evaluated for specialized tasks like generating 3D models and architectural designs. OpenSCAD is a script-based 3D modeling tool, so having an LLM that can effectively generate OpenSCAD code is genuinely useful for that community. On the hobbyist and creative front, Hacker News is featuring a Forth-inspired language for writing websites with 76 points. LobStarRes is also carrying this story with 30 points. For those who don't know, Forth is a stack-based programming language with a cult following among certain programmers who appreciate its simplicity and directness. Seeing Forth concepts applied to web development is definitely an unusual and interesting approach. There's a Show HN post getting attention with 115 points and 42 comments about Shadowcat, which enables file transfer through QR codes in a browser. This is actually a clever solution for secure, air-gapped file transfers. You generate a QR code on one device and scan it with another, eliminating the need for network connectivity or USB drives. It's the kind of simple but effective tool that the Hacker News community tends to appreciate. In the security and developer tools space, Hacker News has a launch HN from Y Combinator with 56 points and 70 comments for Superset, which bills itself as an IDE for the agents era. As AI agents become more sophisticated, there's apparently a need for development environments specifically designed around managing and building with them. And there's a somewhat tongue-in-cheek but also serious post on Hacker News getting significant traction, 643 points and 375 comments from Anna's archive titled, "If You're an LLM." Please read this. The post is about LLMs.txt files, which are apparently becoming a thing for websites to communicate directly with AI systems about how they want their content to be used and cited. It's an interesting intersection of web standards and AI ethics. One more tech story worth mentioning. Hacker News reports with 43 points that lawmakers are demanding answers as CISA tries to contain a data leak. This is from Krebs on security, and we'll dive deeper into this during our security segment because it's particularly relevant there. Now for our security briefing, and we have quite a bit to cover today, starting with the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. CISA added CVE 2026-9082 on May 22nd, with a due date of May 27th. That's just 5 days from now, so this is urgent. This is a Drupal core SQL injection vulnerability that could allow for privilege escalation and remote code execution via specially crafted requests. Bleeping Computer is actually reporting that this critical Drupal SQL injection flaw is now being actively targeted in attacks. This means attackers are already exploiting this in the wild. If you're running Drupal sites, you need to patch immediately. SQL injection vulnerabilities in a content management system are about as serious as it gets because they can give attackers complete control over your database and potentially your entire web server. Moving back a day to May 21st, CISA added CVE 2025-34291 due June 4th. This affects Langflow, and it's an origin validation error vulnerability. There's an overly permissive CORS configuration combined with a refresh token cookie configuration issue. For those managing Langflow deployments, this is something to address, though it requires pre-authentication, so it's not quite as immediately dangerous as the Drupal issue. Also added on May 21st, CVE 2026-34926 affects Trend Micro Apex 1. Bleeping Computer is reporting that Trend Micro is warning about this Apex 1 zero-day being exploited in the wild. It's a directory traversal vulnerability that could allow a pre-authenticated local attacker to modify certain files. The fact that Trend Micro, a security vendor, has a zero-day being actively exploited is particularly concerning. Organizations using Apex 1 should prioritize this patch. Now we get into some older CVEs that CISA added on May 20th. CVE 2008-4250 is a Microsoft Windows buffer overflow in the Windows Server service that allows remote code execution. This is an old vulnerability, but CISA's addition of it to the KEV catalog suggests they're seeing renewed exploitation attempts, perhaps as part of attacks targeting legacy systems. CVE 2009-1537 affects Microsoft DirectX, specifically a null byte overwrite in the QuickTime Movie Parser filter. Again, this is old, but if you've got older Windows systems, these historical vulnerabilities can still be dangerous. CVE 2009-3459 is a heap-based buffer overflow in Adobe Acrobat and Reader that allows remote code execution via crafted PDFs. Old Adobe vulnerabilities remain popular with attackers because so many organizations don't keep their PDF readers updated. CVE 2010-0249 and CVE 2010-0806 are both use-after-free vulnerabilities in Internet Explorer allowing remote code execution. While IE is deprecated, the underlying rendering engines sometimes still exist in other software. There are also two recent Microsoft Defender vulnerabilities. CVE 2026-41091 is a link-following vulnerability allowing privilege escalation, and CVE 2026-45498 is an unspecified vulnerability allowing denial of service. Schneier on Security actually has a post about a macOS kernel memory corruption exploit as well, showing that security issues span across platforms. Now let's talk about the CISA situation itself. This is a developing story that Krebs on Security has been covering extensively. Krebs reports that a CISA admin leaked AWS GovCloud keys on GitHub. This is extraordinarily serious. AWS GovCloud is the special government region of Amazon Web Services designed for sensitive government workloads. Having those credentials leaked on a public GitHub repository is a massive security incident. Krebs has multiple articles on this. One is titled, CISA Admin Leaked AWS GovCloud Keys on GitHub. Another says, Lawmakers Demand Answers as CISA Tries to Contain Data Leak. Schneier on Security also has a post on the CISA security leak. The irony here is profound. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the organization responsible for helping the entire federal government and critical infrastructure sectors improve their cybersecurity, has suffered a significant data breach themselves due to what appears to be poor secrets management practices. This is the kind of incident that will be studied in security courses for years as an example of how even security-focused organizations can fail at basic security hygiene. It also highlights the ongoing challenge of secrets management in modern development workflows. Developers frequently need to use credentials and API keys, and it's all too easy to accidentally commit them to version control systems like Git. From the NVD recent CVEs, we're seeing an interesting mix. There are several very old CVEs being published or updated, which sometimes happens when vulnerabilities are being reclassified or when historical research is being documented. For instance, CVE 1999-0095 has a CVSS score of 10.0, the maximum severity. It relates to the debug command being enabled in SendMill, allowing attackers to execute commands as root. These ancient vulnerabilities serve as reminders of how far security practices have come, but also how some old vulnerable systems may still be out there. Bleeping Computer has several other stories worth noting. The Netherlands seized 800 servers of a hosting firm, enabling cyberattacks. This is part of ongoing international law enforcement operations against bulletproof hosting providers that knowingly host criminal infrastructure. Former U.S. executives pled guilty to aiding tech support scammers, according to Bleeping Computer. Tech support scams remain a significant problem, and it's good to see prosecutions of those who enable these operations. YubiKey has patched 3 maximum severity UniFi OS vulnerabilities, according to Bleeping Computer. If you're running YubiKey networking equipment, and many of us are, you need to update immediately. Maximum severity means these could allow complete compromise of affected devices. The US and Canada arrested and charged a suspected Kimwolf botnet admin. Krebs on Security has coverage of this as well, with the alleged botmaster known as Dort being arrested and charged in both countries. Krebs notes this is part of ongoing efforts to disrupt botnet operations. And finally, Bleeping Computer reports that Google accidentally exposed details of an unfixed Chromium flaw. This is awkward for Google as it means vulnerability details are public before a patch is available, giving attackers a window of opportunity. This kind of premature disclosure, even when accidental, can be very dangerous. Schneier on Security also has posts about a zero-day exploit against Windows BitLocker and continuing thoughts on AI security. The BitLocker exploit is particularly concerning as BitLocker is Microsoft's full-disk encryption solution relied upon by millions of Windows users for protecting data at rest. Let's dive into what's happening in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning research this week. The archive preprint server has been busy, and there are some fascinating papers worth unpacking. First up is a paper on tokenization titled Tokenization via Convex Relaxations. That's archive 2605.22821. This one caught my attention because it's tackling a fundamental problem in how we process language for AI models. Current tokenization methods like byte pair encoding and unigram are what the researchers call greedy algorithms. They make locally optimal choices at each step without necessarily finding the globally best solution. The team here is proposing a new approach using convex relaxations to potentially find better tokenization schemes. This matters because better tokenization can lead to more efficient models and better understanding of text. It's one of those foundational improvements that could ripple through the entire NLP pipeline. Next, we have integrable context-dependent demand networks, archive 2605.22820. This one's taking a demand-first approach to modeling multi-product retail demand using neural networks. They're calling it ICDN, and what's interesting here is that they're learning log demand potentials, which is a more economically principled way to think about how consumers make purchasing decisions across multiple products. For anyone working in e-commerce or retail analytics, this kind of work could lead to better demand forecasting and pricing strategies. The paper Vector Policy Optimization, Training for Diversity Improves Test Time Search, that's archive 2605.22817, is looking at how language models can generalize to novel environments and work effectively inside inference scaling search procedures like AlphaEvolve. The key insight is that training for diversity during the policy optimization phase actually improves the model's ability to search effectively at test time. This is relevant as we're seeing more and more use of search and planning procedures on top of language models. There's a really interesting robotics paper called Remember to be Curious, Episodic Context and Persistent Worlds for 3D Exploration, archive 2605.22814. This addresses the challenge of exploration in sparse reward, long horizon tasks, particularly in 3D environments. The researchers are using curiosity-driven exploration, which is a technique where agents are rewarded for encountering novel situations. What makes this work stand out is the combination of episodic context, memory of what happened in previous attempts, with persistent world representations. This is the kind of work that could advance embodied AI and robotic exploration significantly. Now, the matching principle, a geometric theory of loss functions for nuisance-robust representation learning, archive 2605.22800. This is getting into some heavy mathematical territory, but the core idea is elegant. They're proposing a geometric framework for designing loss functions that make learned representations robust to various kinds of nuisance factors. Whether you're dealing with domain shifts, occlusions, photometric variations, or you need temporal robustness, this matching principle could provide a unified way to think about these challenges. It touches on everything from safety and AI alignment to compositional generalization. Finally, there's finite particle convergence rates for conservative and non-conservative drifting models, archive 2605.22795. This paper is analyzing a conservative drifting method for one-step generative modeling. They're looking at the theoretical convergence rates when you have a finite number of particles in your system. This kind of theoretical work is essential for understanding the limits and guarantees of generative models, even if it's not immediately practical. In broader AI industry news, we're seeing Microsoft make some significant moves. According to The Verge, Microsoft has started canceling internal Claude Code licenses. This is part of a broader shift to token-based AI billing that's apparently blowing up annual budgets within months. It's a reminder that as AI capabilities scale up, so do the costs, and companies are having to make tough decisions about which tools to provide to their employees. Claude from Anthropic has been popular, but those API costs add up fast when you're talking about an organization the size of Microsoft. Speaking of Anthropic, there was an update on Project Glasswing on Hacker News that's getting some attention, 74 points and 33 comments. I'll link to the full update in the show notes, but Glasswing appears to be Anthropic's ongoing research into model interpretability and understanding what's actually happening inside these large language models. DeepSeek is making waves by making their V4 Pro price discount permanent, according to their API documentation. This is significant because DeepSeek has been offering competitive pricing on capable models, and a permanent price reduction could put pressure on other providers. The post on Hacker News has 182 points and 93 comments, so there's definitely interest in the community. Over on Hacker News, there's a post with 643 points titled, "If You're an LLM, Please Read This," linking to Anna's archive. This is part of an ongoing conversation about how to communicate with AI systems that might be training on web content. The idea of leaving messages for future AI systems is both humorous and thought-provoking. It raises questions about transparency, training data, and how these systems should identify themselves. And there's a fascinating paper getting attention. Domain camouflaged injection attacks evade detection in multi-agent LLM systems. Archive 2605.22001. This is highlighting security vulnerabilities in systems that use multiple AI agents working together. The attackers can camouflage malicious injections by making them look like they belong to the domain context, and the multi-agent systems have a harder time detecting these attacks. As we build more complex agentic systems, security is going to be absolutely critical, and this research is helping us understand the attack surface. GitHub Trending is showing some interesting AI-related projects. There's something called CodeGraph from Kolbim-Chenry, RuView from RuvNet, and the Chrome DevTools Model Control Protocol integration is trending. We're also seeing movement around AI engineering education. Rohit Zero has a repository called AI Engineering from Scratch that's getting attention. The AI development tools ecosystem is exploding, and it's getting harder to keep track of all the new frameworks and approaches. Let's talk Homelab and infrastructure. This is where things get hands-on and practical, and there's been quite a bit of activity this week that Homelab enthusiasts need to know about. First, some critical security news. Bleeping Computer is reporting that Trend Micro has warned about an Apex 1 zero-day vulnerability that's being actively exploited in the wild. This is CVE 2026-34926, and CISA has added it to their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. According to the advisory, this is a directory traversal vulnerability in Trend Micro Apex 1 on-premise deployments. A pre-authenticated local attacker could modify a key tab, that's a Kerberos keytab file, which is a serious security issue. If you're running Trend Micro Apex 1 in your environment, whether it's a home lab or enterprise, you need to patch this immediately. CISA is giving federal agencies until June 4th to remediate, but honestly, you should be patching this today. There's also a fresh NGINX vulnerability making the rounds. According to posts on the Homelab subreddit, this is being called Engine Expulslip, CVE 2026-9256. This is another vulnerability in the rewrite module of NGINX. If you're using NGINX as a reverse proxy, which many of us are for Homelab services, you need to pay attention to this. The vulnerability affects how NGINX handles memory pools during rewrite operations, and it could potentially lead to information disclosure or denial of service. Check your NGINX version and update if you're vulnerable. The Homelab subreddit thread has 104 points, so this is getting a lot of attention in the community. Over on Reddit's Homelab subreddit, there's been an interesting community announcement about AI posts. With 166 points, the moderators are clearly trying to get ahead of what could become an overwhelming trend. As AI tools become more integrated into Homelab workflows, whether it's using LLMs to generate automation scripts or AI-assisted network troubleshooting, the community is figuring out how to handle that content. It's a sign of how pervasive AI is becoming in every technical domain. One of the top posts this week is from a 15-year-old showing off their Homelab setup, 301 points. It's always inspiring to see young people getting into this stuff. Building a Homelab teaches so much about networking, systems administration, virtualization, storage, and troubleshooting. It's hands-on learning that you just can't get from books or videos alone. If you've got kids interested in technology, encourage them to tinker. A used enterprise server on eBay and sometime on YouTube can be an incredible education. Ubiquiti has patched 3 maximum severity vulnerabilities in UniFi OS, according to Bleeping Computer. These are rated 10.0 on the CVSS scale, which is as serious as it gets. If you're running Ubiquiti gear in your network, and I know a lot of Homelab folks love their UniFi equipment, make sure you're updating to the latest firmware. These kinds of critical vulnerabilities in network equipment can be catastrophic if exploited, potentially giving attackers complete control over your network infrastructure. There's exciting news on the memory pricing front. According to a post on the Homelab subreddit with 17 points, memory prices are tipped to fall as China starts flooding the market with DRAM and NAND chips. This is great news for anyone planning server upgrades or building new systems. We've been dealing with inflated memory prices for a while now, so a correction would be welcome. If you've been holding off on maxing out the RAM in your Proxmox server or expanding your storage array, it might be worth waiting a few months to see where prices land. On the DNS front, there's news from both LobStarRes and various sources about DNS infrastructure. The FTC is requiring Cox Media Group to pay nearly $1 million to settle charges around their active listening, AI-powered marketing service. This ties into privacy concerns that many Homelab users have, which is why tools like Pi-hole, Technidium, and AdGuard are so popular in our community. Running your own DNS resolver with ad blocking and privacy protections is one of the foundational pieces of a good Homelab setup. For those interested in network automation and infrastructure as code, there's continued development in the Kubernetes and container orchestration space. GitHub Trending is showing activity around various automation projects, and over on Hacker News, the Deno 2.8 release is getting attention with 229 points and 110 comments. While Deno isn't strictly Homelab infrastructure, it's interesting for those of us who are automating our environments with JavaScript or TypeScript. Deno's security-first approach and modern API design make it appealing for writing automation scripts and tools. There's also a post on Hacker News about an open-source Kanban desktop app that runs parallel agents on every card, canbots.dev. This has 68 points and 37 comments. The idea of having AI agents working on tasks within a project management system is intriguing. Imagine a Kanban board where you're not just tracking infrastructure tasks, but actually have agents that can execute certain automation tasks directly from the cards. We're seeing the convergence of project management, automation, and AI in interesting ways. For those of you following Ahead Inc., and I should mention I work there, we've got some fantastic resources published this week. Over on Ahead.com, there's new content covering everything from AI factories to intelligent operations. One piece that stands out is titled Reimagining IT Operations with Agentic AI. This is exploring how AI agents can transform how we manage and operate IT infrastructure. There's also content on ServiceNow Knowledge 2026, breaking down what actually matters from that conference and what you should do about it. Ahead has also published The Conversations Healthcare Leaders Are Having Behind Closed Doors, which dives into how AI is being discussed in healthcare IT contexts. And for those dealing with VMware transitions, there's a piece on turning Broadcom VCF and VKS entitlements into a modern private cloud. That's vSphere and Kubernetes entitlements for those following the Broadcom acquisition aftermath. There's also technical content on benchmarking single-card LLM inference on Intel Gaudi 3 for enterprise workloads, and a playbook for liquid-cooled infrastructure for AI. These are the kinds of resources that are valuable whether you're running enterprise infrastructure or trying to understand what's possible in a sophisticated home lab. I'll link all of these in the show notes. On the networking side, Mozilla has announced web serial support in Firefox, which is getting 72 points on LobStarOS. This is significant for anyone doing hardware hacking, Arduino projects, or anything that requires serial communication from a web browser. Chrome has had this for a while, but Firefox adding support means better cross-browser compatibility for web-based hardware tools. And there's a great post about GNU-Tella, the old peer-to-peer file sharing protocol, titled "A Protocol Outliving the World That Created It." This is on LobStarOS with 69 points. It's a fascinating look at how technology can persist long after its original context has disappeared. GNU-Tella was huge in the early 2000s for file sharing, and the fact that it's still out there, still working, is a testament to robust protocol design. There are lessons there for anyone building distributed systems. Let's shift gears to science and space. NASA has been busy, and there's some interesting stuff happening both on Earth and beyond. First, looking at the NASA astronomy picture of the day, unfortunately the data I'm seeing isn't showing the specific images for the past few days, but I encourage everyone to check out apod.nasa.gov. The astronomy picture of the day is one of those delightful daily traditions that reminds us how vast and beautiful the universe is. Whether it's a stunning nebula, a planetary conjunction, or something closer to home like aurora or atmospheric phenomena, it's always worth a look. From NASA's breaking news feed, we've got several stories worth highlighting. NASA has set coverage for a Roscosmos spacewalk outside the International Space Station. These spacewalks are always precisely choreographed events, and NASA provides live coverage so the public can watch. Despite the geopolitical tensions between the United States and Russia, the cooperation on the International Space Station continues. It's one of the last bastions of US-Russia cooperation, and honestly, it's something we should celebrate. The crew up there works together regardless of what's happening on the ground, and that's inspiring. The James Webb Space Telescope has been studying star clusters, and NASA released an image article about it this week. Webb continues to deliver absolutely stunning images and groundbreaking science. These star cluster observations help us understand stellar evolution, how stars form in groups, and the dynamics of these dense stellar environments. Webb's infrared capabilities let it see through dust clouds that obscure visible light, revealing details we've never been able to observe before. There's a feature on NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center about ground crews and how they ensure aircraft readiness. This is one of those behind-the-scenes stories that highlights the incredible work that goes into aerospace operations. Every flight, whether it's a test flight of an experimental aircraft or a research mission, requires meticulous preparation by ground crews. These are the mechanics, technicians, and engineers who make sure everything is safe and operational. It's a good reminder that space exploration and aerospace research isn't just about astronauts and pilots. It's about the hundreds or thousands of people supporting every mission. NASA has announced some significant organizational news. They're competing the contract for Jet Propulsion Laboratory Management. JPL has been managed by Caltech since 1936, so this is a major shift. JPL is responsible for many of NASA's robotic missions, Mars rovers, Europa Clipper, numerous Earth science satellites. The decision to compete this contract suggests NASA is looking at different management models. It'll be interesting to see who bids and whether Caltech retains the contract or if we see a new organization take over. This could have significant implications for how JPL operates and what missions they pursue. NASA has also announced a realignment to accelerate mission delivery. This is about organizational structure and how NASA manages its programs and projects. The agency has been dealing with budget constraints, cost overruns on some major programs, and pressure to deliver missions faster. This realignment is an attempt to streamline processes and get missions from concept to launch more quickly. Whether it succeeds remains to be seen, but it's clear NASA leadership recognizes they need to adapt to a changing space landscape where commercial companies like SpaceX are moving much faster than traditional aerospace. Beyond NASA, there's been some interesting science news in the broader feeds. Over on Hacker News, there's a scoping review of bicycling interventions and their impacts on well-being. That's a link to a Frontiers Journal article. This kind of research is important as cities think about infrastructure investments. The evidence increasingly shows that making cities more bike-friendly doesn't just improve transportation, it improves public health, reduces emissions, and enhances quality of life. It's good science supporting policy decisions. On the astronomy and space enthusiast front, there's a post on Hacker News with over 1,100 points about Project Hail Mary stellar navigation. This is a reference to Andy Weir's science fiction novel, and someone has created an interactive stellar navigation chart based on the book. It's at valhovy.github.io/Gaia-Mary, and it's getting a lot of attention. This is one of those beautiful intersections of science fiction, real astronomy data, and web visualization. The book involves interstellar travel and navigation using actual stellar positions, and fans have turned that into an interactive tool. It's the kind of project that gets people excited about astronomy and space exploration. We should also talk about what's happening in the night sky right now. Late May is actually a great time for stargazing as we're heading into summer in the northern hemisphere. The days are longer, but once it gets dark, you've got good viewing conditions if you're away from city lights. Jupiter is visible in the evening sky, and Saturn is rising later at night. If you've got a telescope, this is a good time to observe Saturn's rings. The Milky Way core is becoming more prominent as summer approaches, so if you can get away from light pollution, you can see that beautiful band of stars across the sky. Memorial Day weekend is actually a perfect time to get out, maybe go camping and do some stargazing. Let's talk business and the economy. There's a lot happening in markets and the tech sector that's worth understanding. Bloomberg is reporting that the S&P 500 has posted its 8th consecutive weekly gain, powered largely by AI stocks. This is a remarkable run. We're seeing continued optimism around artificial intelligence and its economic impact. Companies like NVIDIA, Microsoft, and other AI infrastructure providers have been driving market gains. The question, of course, is whether this is sustainable or if we're in the middle of an AI bubble. Bulls argue that AI is genuinely transformative and will drive productivity gains across the economy. Bears worry that expectations have gotten ahead of reality and that we're due for a correction. The dollar has stalled as US-Iran peace hopes boost risk sentiment, also from Bloomberg. This is a fascinating dynamic. When there's geopolitical tension, investors typically flee to safe havens like the US dollar and treasury bonds. When tensions ease, as we're seeing with the Iran negotiations, investors move back into riskier assets like stocks and emerging market currencies. The dollar weakening is actually a sign that markets are feeling more confident about global stability. Whether those peace talks ultimately succeed is another question, but markets are pricing in optimism right now. Gold has dropped after Fed official Christopher Waller said the next move in interest rates is likely to be a hike rather than a cut. Gold typically moves inversely to interest rates. When rates go up, gold becomes less attractive because it doesn't pay interest or dividends. Waller's comments suggest the Fed is still concerned about inflation and isn't ready to cut rates. This is important context for anyone thinking about the economy. We've had this expectation that the Fed would start cutting rates in 2026, but if inflation remains persistent, we might see rates stay higher for longer or even increase. In corporate news, Bloomberg reports that Lantheus is weighing a potential $7 billion sale following an offer from Curium. Lantheus is in the medical imaging and radiopharmaceutical space, which is an interesting corner of healthcare technology. These kinds of M&A deals are happening across the tech and healthcare sectors as companies with cash look for strategic acquisitions. Municipal bond sales have surged in 2026, according to Bloomberg. This is interesting because it suggests state and local governments are taking advantage of current conditions to fund infrastructure projects. For anyone in local government or working on public infrastructure, this is worth paying attention to. Municipalities issue bonds to fund things like roads, schools, water systems, and increasingly, broadband infrastructure and renewable energy projects. Over on Reddit's r/artificial, there's a post with 452 points about Microsoft canceling internal Anthropic licenses as the shift to token-based AI billing blows up annual budgets within months. This is a real challenge companies are facing. Traditional software licensing involved predictable annual costs. Token-based AI services mean costs scale with usage, and if your employees are using AI tools heavily, those costs can spiral. Microsoft apparently budgeted for a certain level of usage, but actual consumption exceeded projections so significantly that they had to cut off access to some tools. This is going to force companies to think more carefully about AI tool provisioning and governance. There's also discussion on Reddit about rethinking the AI bubble, 37 points on r/artificial. Some folks are arguing that comparing the current AI boom to the dot-com bubble is misleading because AI is already delivering real value in specific domains, unlike many dot-com companies that never had viable business models. Others argue that we're still over-investing based on speculative future returns. The truth is probably somewhere in between. AI will be transformative, but not every AI company will succeed and not every investment will pay off. Looking at broader economic indicators, we're heading into Memorial Day weekend, which is traditionally the start of summer travel season. Gas prices are being influenced by various factors, including the Iran situation. NPR has a piece about driving slower, going electric, or not driving at all as options for saving money on gas. With tensions easing with Iran, we might see some relief at the pump, but global oil markets remain volatile. The tech layoff trend seems to have stabilized somewhat. We're not seeing the massive waves of layoffs we saw in late 2024 and early 2025, but companies are being much more cautious about hiring. There's a focus on efficiency and profitability rather than growth at all costs. For anyone in the tech job market, this means opportunities exist, but competition is fierce. Specialization in areas like AI, security, and cloud infrastructure seems to be where demand is strongest. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Clovis Brief. We've covered a lot of ground today, from critical security vulnerabilities in NGINX and Trend Micro to fascinating AI research coming out of Archive, from NASA's ongoing work on the International Space Station and the James Webb Space Telescope to market dynamics and what's happening in tech business and the economy. Remember to check the show notes for links to everything we discussed. There are some really valuable resources from ahead on AI infrastructure and intelligent operations, the archive papers we talked about, and all those hacker news and Reddit threads if you want to dive deeper into the community discussions. Tomorrow we'll be digging into some local news, more on what's happening with CISA and that data leak situation that Krebs on Security has been covering. And I want to talk more about what's happening with home automation and some interesting projects in that space. There's also more to unpack about the Broadcom VMware situation and how that's affecting enterprise infrastructure decisions. Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the Clovis Brief, please share it with someone who'd appreciate a daily dose of tech, security, and thoughtful analysis. Stay curious, stay secure, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is the Clovis Brief. I'm your host, signing off from Wonder Lake, Illinois.